Yes, I don't want to delay any more than we've already delayed. The guy's been very patient. I'll let John Rothmann, the former KGO talk show host and now does a daily podcast called Around the Political World with John Rothmann, I'll let him share in some of the comments that have come across in the last few minutes. How about it for John Rothmann, everybody? Hey, John.
Happy to be with you. Go for it.
I don't hear. I was just mentioning Biden is absolutely a Democrat, says Judy, but he is not a liberal. He is more moderate. BA says, I get sick of hearing all the right-wingers yelling Soros all the time, but there is criticism to be given on this one. This is about the protest. Gordon says, Biden is not a lib unless you're comparing him to the far-right crazies. Finally, on the graduation and hold-up, said Nancy says, I'm going to my daughter's San Diego State graduation this Saturday, so congratulations on that. But, John, I was mentioning that, many of these protests, I really don't, I understand you've spoken before, and we can get into it a bit on Gaza and the like, but I was speaking just about, without regard to the cause, the disruptions associated with many of these protests have sent people who you traditionally would think of as libs, as left of center, and probably their politics on women's reproductive rights and this kind of thing would align with the left. They are now frustrated by the fact that these campuses are being shut down, and after the COVID shutdowns, their kids are not able to enjoy a normal graduation, and they're actually flirting with right-wing politics in ways that they've never considered before. I wonder if you could speak to that and to the Biden left or right or center kind of label.
Biden's always been a centrist Democrat. That is where he is. He was a bridge between liberals and conservatives in the Democratic Party, and he remains that. As to the question of campus protests, these are not normal protests. As we now know, many of the people participating in protests are not on campus. They come from outside the campus. It's now established and clear. And I have to tell you, it is a reflection of Hamas. That is disorder, chaos. And one of the most disturbing things to me is with all the demonstrations, there are no cries against Jew hatred. There are no cries to release the hostages. And that's the hypocrisy of what's going on the campus, pure and simple.
The cries on the campus, this is the campus of UCLA that you're seeing right now, and that campus, as you know, the administration buildings and many of the teaching halls could not be reached by students who wanted to just attend class. The label of peaceful protest that has been, I think, used in relation to many of these sit-ins and encampments. Could you speak to that for a moment?
These are not peaceful protests. I'm sorry. All you have to do is take a look at the attitude of Jewish students. I met with a woman the other night whose daughter goes to UCLA. She tells me her daughter does not feel safe on the UCLA campus. These are hate rallies opposed to Jews and opposed to Israel. Listen, BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, this is not new. It's been promoted for years by the Palestinian and far left students on campus. But this is not a left-right issue. This is not a question any more than projecting the chaos that Hamas has demonstrated onto the campuses. And I don't think most of these students support Hamas. I don't think most of these students hate Jews, but I believe they have been co-opted. All you have to do is listen to the Columbia University head of the boycott, divestment, sanctions group, who says all Zionists should be killed. And I think we played it last week or 2 weeks ago here on this program. This is one of the most disturbing developments. And may I say now, and I say this as somebody who is deeply involved in American politics, somebody who is an active member of the Jewish community. I'm a former president of the Zionist Organization of America here in Northern California. This is hate speech, pure and simple. By the way, one can say that and still have full sympathy for the Palestinians. I have advocated for a two-state solution for years. I want to remind everybody, Hamas is only in favor of a one-state solution. That is the elimination of Israel. And that is something that ought to be protested by all Americans.
Well, to be fair to this situation, then we'll segue everyone from this to what's going on with the former President Trump. But to be fair to this conversation, I think it is worth noting that I'm hearing more and more about occupation and 75 years of occupation, to which I always say, wait a minute. I mean, Israel is a legitimate country recognized by such by the world community. They're not Hamas. They're not Hezbollah. They're not Islamic Jihad. It's not some rogue occupation that's going on. Now, if you want to get to a two-state solution, then you've got to recognize the one state, which is Israel. I mean, this is, to me, I think, a frustrating part. What's happened is the conversation has become so derailed, and I've seen it here on YouTube. With people who I would consider friends of mine who are smart, but they've been swept up in that kind of reference, and I think it's really disturbing.
It is. Well, the minute you hear 75 years of occupation, you're going back to 1948. You're talking about the delegitimization of Israel. And that's why when they chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The river is the Jordan River, the sea is the Mediterranean, and Israel is in the middle. What they are calling for is the destruction of Israel. And why there isn't outrage on campus is expressed firmly, strongly, powerfully. Because, ladies and gentlemen, you can indeed favor Palestinian rights, but not at the expense of Israel's right to exist.
Roberta is asking you, John, ask John to clarify what he means by Zionist. Could you speak to that, please, John?
I can. Zionism believes that the Jews, like any other people in the world, are entitled to a place of their own. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. Let me remind you that it was the Zionists who rescued the Soviet Jews, who now make up over 1 million residents in Israel. It is the Zionist movement that resurrected a Jewish state. And I also want to remind you that the world recognized the right of the Jews to have a state. What you're dealing with now are people who say Jews do not have a right to a state. And when people attack Zionists, what Martin Luther King Jr. said was absolutely true. When people attack Zionists, they mean Jews. They're talking anti-Semitism.
Well, on that, I have two more questions, and then I'm going to move on. Congress is turning its attention to anti-Semitism in K through 12 schools. School officials from California, New York, and Maryland face questions from lawmakers in a hearing today over reports of anti-Semitism in their school districts. Florida Republican Aaron Bean claimed incidents have surged in the K through 12 schools following the Hamas October attack on Israel. That's the spread of straight-up anti-Semitism.
And it's true. It's happening here in San Francisco. We have raised this question with the superintendent of schools, Matt Wayne, because of an incident that took place at Lowell, another incident that took place at Washington High School. This is taking place everywhere because this is an organized effort to attack the legitimacy of Israel and to go after Jews. And this is something I never thought in my life I would witness in the United States of America. And it has to be fought with every fiber of our being.
The half-life of the Holocaust experience that the Jewish community went through in Europe, I would have thought that half-life much longer than it appears to be.
If you remember the Holocaust, look, I served for 26 years as chairman of the Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance, here in San Francisco. And it was a powerful experience to sit with survivors, to talk with them, to understand their experience. But I want to remind you, for most people in this country, the Holocaust is as ancient history as the American Revolution. And we cannot forget what happened. And I must tell you, it is something of a repeat. And I commend Joe Biden, who spoke yesterday at the annual occasion of the observance of Holocaust Remembrance and said, our memories are too short. He said, I will not forget what happened on October 7th. I will not forget the slaughter of Jews, the greatest slaughter since the Holocaust. People need to understand. And I regret to say that on campuses across America, it's not that they don't understand. I think many do. But I think the protest leadership is coming from a position of advocating the destruction of Israel. And that is the problem. And I don't say it lightly. I hear it every single day. I'm telling you, I was with a woman the other night whose daughter goes to UCLA, who said her daughter is afraid to go on campus. And if that is where we are today, there is something seriously wrong.
I had the same conversation last night with someone whose kid is at UCLA. So On to Biden, because you did mention it, and I just want to talk about the political aspects of this. You mentioned Biden and his remarks. I'm so glad you did, because I was going to ask you about it anyway. But now, this. The U.S. has stopped a large shipment of arms to Israel as officials worry about the cost of a large-scale military offensive in southern Gaza. U.S. officials say the move is to head off a full Israeli invasion of Rafah and to prevent civilian casualties as ceasefire negotiations continue. It's believed to be the first time the U.S. has halted an arms shipment to Israel since its war with Hamas started. Can you
That's
speak to that?
correct. But I want to be crystal clear about this. They're talking about munitions, bombs of massive proportion. Israel doesn't need bombs to go into Rafah. Israel is going to do what it has to do to protect itself. And you will note the administration has backpedaled. This has not been stopped. It's been suspended for a temporary period of time. And this is not the first time in presidential relations with Israel where something has been suspended. I always remember the loan guarantees during the Bush administration. It was the same logic. But the Israelis are determined to move forward. They are going to move forward. And let me assure you, if we had been attacked as the Israelis were, boy, I watched this morning on CNN the account of Afghanistan. Look what we did in Afghanistan. Look what we did in Iraq. And that's nothing compared to what happened in Israel. So my suggestion is that the Israelis believe that they can only trust themselves in the end, and America remains a firm ally of Israel. Let me remind you that just 3 weeks ago, with America, Great Britain, and France together, the attempt by Iran to attack Israel was thwarted. Can you imagine that Iran tried again to attack Israel, but this time directly? And this morning, Iran is talking again about using its surrogates in order to attack what they call the Zionist entity. Now, Joe Biden deserves high marks for this. The more logical question is, will this hurt his presidential campaign?
Well, that's what I was getting to, John. And, I appreciate you addressing the other things, but what is the answer?
The answer is, I believe it will not hurt him. I believe Joe Biden will carry Michigan. And by the way, did you see what happened in Indiana
And you
yesterday?
mentioned Michigan, but hang on a second. You mentioned Michigan for a specific reason. What is that reason?
There is a high Muslim concentration in Michigan, and they are passionate about this issue. But do you think they're going to vote for Donald Trump, who advocated a ban on Muslims coming to the United States? No, when the whole issue is out, people will understand. But I want to mention in Indiana, they had a primary yesterday in Indiana, and Nikki Haley, who is not a candidate for president, got 22% of the Republican vote.
I'm so glad John mentioned this. This is something that I wanted to say in the open, and we got caught up in other things. This is key for just that reason that you're getting to, John. Go ahead.
I believe that the American people will have better sense than to put Donald Trump, and I'm going to call him what he is, a sleaze. They have better sense than putting a sleaze in the White House. When Nikki Haley can get 22% of the vote in Indiana, and I'm very familiar with Indiana. My wife's family's from Indianapolis. I have spent many summers in Indiana. I understand how conservative the state is. I talked to one of the leading Republicans in Indiana who said he will not vote for Donald Trump. And let me indicate to you that Mike Pence, who is from Indiana, has said he won't vote for Donald Trump. And I should underline and emphasize, to have 22% of Republicans vote for Nikki Haley after the nomination is basically secured by Donald Trump should send a message to Republican leaders. The real question to be asked is, what will happen at the Republican convention? Will the Republican Party follow blindly the path forged by Donald Trump? And I hope they don't, but if they do, they will lose the election. I have every confidence of that. By the way, you heard the other story. There's a new issue, act in Congress, the SAVE Act, which is designed to ensure, this is by Speaker Johnson and other members of the right wing, to ensure only American citizens can vote in an election. It is the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the American people. And the fact that a former president of the United States and a Speaker of the House of Representatives are claiming that, well, you heard what happened here in California when Donald Trump lost this state. He wanted, as you pointed out, Mark, he wanted an investigation. The investigation lasted, what, a week, and then had to shut down because there was no proof at all that non-citizens were voting. I find this so upsetting. The SAVE Act requires proof of citizenship to vote. It's the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yes, it is. I agree, but it's not the biggest fraud perpetrated on the American people. That's typical Rothmann hyperbole. The biggest fraud. I'd like to ask you to name top 3 frauds, John Rothmann. I think the Iraqi invasion was one of the top frauds. I think the war in Vietnam was one of the top frauds.
Let me tell you why I call it a great fraud.
We're a country bent on our own fraud that we pitch to the American people.
The reason why I consider this to be so disastrous is because it affects the very essence of American politics. If you can't have faith in an orderly transition of power, if you cannot have faith that the elections in the United States are legitimate, the whole world will look at us and say what fools these Americans are.
Well, of course you're right, John, but the voter suppression has been a part of American life, well, since voting
Yes,
began.
And what happened when we had voter suppression in this country during the 1950s and 60s? The United States passed not only a Civil Rights Act in 1964, a Voting Rights Act in 1965, a Voting Rights Act in 1968. We have responded with great vigor. And may I also...
Well, we haven't, John. There's voter suppression that still goes on, and you know this. In Texas, they reduced the ballot. Same is true in Georgia and other red states. Come on, voter suppression is alive and well.
But not the mass fraud that Donald Trump is suggesting took place. Not the discrediting of American elections ad hominem. That's a ding word, by the way.
It's something.
I just want to be clear to people. If I sound agitated or excited or disturbed, it is because Donald Trump, listening to this trial, which I'm listening to the accounts of the trial because they won't let cameras into the courtroom. This man is a sleaze. He has no business being in the White House. And Republicans who want to embrace his policies should find a candidate who will reflect the policies, but certainly not the individual who is now on trial. And by the way, the other thing, and you're absolutely right, I heard your monologue. I come on early, ladies and gentlemen, just to listen to the wisdom of Mark Thompson. But the fact that the trial dealing with his abuse of his power, the so-called declassification of classified documents, the fact that the judge, who, by the way, is a Trump appointee and who has rolled over for Trump repeatedly, the fact that Judge Cannon's ruling will stand, and Kim asked a question, is there any way to overturn it? The answer is no. She is the judge of record, and you'll discuss this, I know, with Mr. Katz, but tragically, Donald Trump is getting breaks because the fix is in, but it's not fixed completely. And I'm going to listen tomorrow again to what happens in the trial in New York, and I hope that we will see January 6th prosecutions. It may come later, but it will come unless Donald Trump is elected president.
If Trump's elected, it all goes away. George Will's column today says Wren recommends that people don't vote. She says that's unbelievably anti-democracy and anti-American.
And I'm surprised George would say such a thing. Let me tell you, if people don't vote, women's rights when it comes to their control of their own bodies is out the window.
Well, I would say, I think that's a great point you make. Not voting is voting. I mean, there's an idea somehow if I didn't vote, I'm not responsible for this. Quite the contrary. It's very much your responsibility if you don't vote.
And let me point out, Marjorie Taylor Greene is demanding all aid to Ukraine stop. Do you understand that if Ukraine falls, Eastern Europe is once again threatened, and perhaps Western Europe? Don't people understand our support for Israel is critical? And you know who understands it? The Saudis understand it. The Egyptians understand it. The Jordanians understand it, because there is a war going on between Sunni and Shia. And God forbid the Shiites should win. It would be a disaster for the West. But these are serious issues. By the way, one other quick point. I know you're going to talk about the environment later on, and that's perfect because you heard that April was the hottest month in recorded history. And let me tell you, we may say here in San Francisco, where it's a very temperate climate, but if you live in places where heat is overwhelming and where we're now talking about ultimately the transfer of populations who won't be able to live because of climate change, and the fact that there's no discussion of that issue is, to me, one of the most shocking things in this world.
Well,
there may be nothing we can do about it.
The last administration, the Trump administration, dry cleaned all government websites of any reference to climate change, a climate crisis, as you well know.
I'm telling you, the man's a sleaze and a danger.
I don't know what sleaze means. I mean, I know what sleaze means, but in what I will say this, John, I don't care about him rolling around with porn stars and Playboy models and paying them off to be quiet. I don't care. I care about the fact that payments were made to keep the information out of the public discourse. I think that is important. But I really don't care about his his sex scandals.
No, I don't care about his sex life.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I care about is
the
that,
sleaziness
look,
applies to.
why did Richard Nixon resign? Richard Nixon resigned not because he authorized the Watergate break-in. It was the cover-up. It was the attempt to intrude on the honesty and integrity of what should have been a system operating correctly. And that is the problem of Donald Trump. And he's very open about it. Did you read the Time magazine interview? Take a look at that Time magazine interview.
That was unbelievable. More on that the next time. I've got to wrap up.
You have to wrap
John,
up?
Find John in a couple of...
I want you to give a full report that your father is doing better.
What?
Yes.
That's very important. And I want to just tell you that Kim McAllister did a brilliant job while you were away.
She was great.
It was great. I loved it.
Yeah, she really was.
By the way, my niece's name is Kimberly, and she is 30 years old, and we call her Kimmy. So you can call somebody Kimmy.
Oh, that's sweet. Well, that's sweet. So, yes. Well, to Kimmys and Kims and Kimberlys everywhere, we salute you. And John Rothmann.
Mark, thank you. I look forward to next week. We never have enough time.
His podcast is Around the Political World with John Rothmann. Albert, we should get to John a little earlier next time. Please make sure I do. I blame you, Albert, for us not making it to...
Don't you blame Albert for everything?
Yes, I do.
Albert, thank you.
And that's part of the...
I blame you.
All right, well, maybe it's my fault. I don't know.
All right.
Let's not make it about the blame. It's Albert's fault. John, we love you. Thank you, John Rothmann. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.